So a few weeks ago, I made a video about why I'm not a socialist, which if you're interested in that, then I invite you to go check it out. But there was a minority of people who commented on that who insisted that if I'm gonna make a video like that, then I'm under some sort of obligation to also make a video about why I'm not a capitalist. I think that at least in a few cases, that challenge was offered not as an invitation to hear what I actually have to say on the topic, but as an assumption that if I'm not a socialist, I must be a capitalist and therefore unequal to rise to that challenge. And that's my first complaint about exchanges concerning politics or economics. For far too many of us, we've been led to believe that there are only two alternatives when considering the question of how it is that human beings are to organize themselves in community. And worse than that, there are plenty of people who believe that in any question of truth, we are to pick a spot on the infallible spectrum of left or right. And I fundamentally reject that notion. If I say I'm not a socialist, I'm not saying that I am a capitalist. In fact, I don't even see those two as meaningful alternatives at all. And I often come back to a quote which I could have sworn was by Chesterton, but now I'm at a loss to remember who said this. But they said something like, "The problem with capitalism is that it concentrates the majority of the wealth and the power in the hands of a minority. The problem with socialism is that it concentrates the majority of wealth and power in the hands of a minority." I would never describe myself as a capitalist because I think it's degrading to position ourselves in a posture of subservience to an ideology like that. The only label that I believe doesn't reduce us to something less than we are is Catholic, because Catholic means the whole. It means the whole picture, the whole truth. That's what I follow. As a Catholic, I can appreciate the attempts to offer solutions to humanity's problems in both capitalism and in socialism, but neither of them offer a complete solution because both of them treat humanity's problems as merely material, which reduces us to our basic needs, like a herd that just needs to be fenced in and fed. A movie that I saw somewhat recently and that I enjoyed, I think a lot more than the critics did, was called Passenger, starring Jennifer Lawrence and I want to say Christopher Pratt. I don't know if that's his name or not. But I quite enjoyed it. And the reason is because it raised a lot of meaningful questions about what it means to be human and what it means to have a fully human life. So the story is about this spaceship that is traveling on this long journey that would last much longer than the span of a human life, carrying a number of passengers to some new intergalactic settlement who are all in a state of suspended animation to survive the journey when something malfunctions and one of the passengers wakes up. He's basically alone on a cruise ship that has all the food and entertainment you can ask for, but his situation reminds us that merely having your material needs provided for isn't enough to satisfy the spectrum of that which makes a person fully human. So he begins to entertain the dilemma of waking up another passenger. And I imagine that for a lot of people, they would look at that and say, that's the missing piece, because we have basic needs, but we also have social needs. Otherwise we get lonely and depressed. And I don't think that really captures the whole of the problem. This hierarchy of needs that we've all been educated to believe in has always struck me as carrying with it the implication that we are mere consumers who have to have our appetites satiated, including our appetite for relationship. But we don't just need relationships. We need to have a purpose. We have to experience life as an amelioration of moral choices that have eternal consequences, because we are moral agents and we have to exercise that moral agency. And if we don't, we become restless, bored, and sterile. And that moral agency is best experienced and tested within our personal relationships, because it's easy to think of ourselves as being kind, patient, generous, and agreeable until someone else with a different temperament from our own and different wants and preferences begins to compete with our own. The experience of trying to blend your life with somebody else's, to try to provide for somebody else, and then to try to care for and provide for the lives that might be produced through that relationship at their most critical stages, as well as their entire lives, is the most intense confrontation and immersion into this experience of our moral qualifications. It isn't just that we get lonely without opportunities to have and experience personal relationships. It's that we stop having opportunities to learn and grow as moral beings. And then as a result, the moral dimension of our souls falls into decay and ruin. Capitalism doesn't seem to appreciate any of these dimensions of human life or our humanity, and if it is meant to provide solutions to human flourishing, or what Aristotle calls eudaimonia, then it falls critically short of these requirements. And if you want something a little more authoritative from a Catholic perspective, then consider what Pope St. John Paul II had to say in his encyclical Centesimus Annus. Quote, "In reality, while on the one hand it is true that capitalism shows the failure of Marxism to contribute to a humane and better society, on the other hand, insofar as it denies an autonomous existence and value to morality, law, culture, and religion, it agrees with Marxism in the sense that it totally reduces man to the sphere of economics and the satisfaction of material needs." Or consider what Catholic thinker Christopher Dawson said when he said, "Both communism and capitalism agree in putting economic things first and in ordering society to an economic end, and consequently, they are both far more opposed to Catholicism than they are to one another." And I think G.K. Chesterton had a point when he said, "It is capitalism that has destroyed the influence of the parent in favor of the influence of the employer, that has driven men from their homes to look for jobs, that has forced them to live near their factories or their firms instead of near their families, and above all, that has encouraged for commercial reasons a parade of publicity and garish novelty, which is in its nature the death of all that was called dignity and modesty by our mothers and our fathers." And I would add, sadly, that it is capitalism that turns people like the Kardashians into role models and pornography into your 13-year-old son's new best friend. And that's because the aim of capitalism is profit and growth, and it doesn't address the moral implications of those ends. If it thrusts highly dysfunctional people into the cultural looking glass of our lives and then normalizes their abnormal lives, as long as it produces profit, then it satisfies the goals and the aims of capitalism. It creates compulsions and addictions to vices that premature brains are helpless to resist before they've had a fighting chance to say no. When I was a teenager, it was drugs and cigarettes and alcohol, and now it's pornography. And as long as somebody's balance sheet is tipped in the right direction, then capitalism will reward those efforts. It tells parents that the primary and necessary goal of their vocation is economic advancement, and it relentlessly pressures both of them to leave the home to work, when study after study tells us that kids experience drastically better outcomes when their mother stays at home and sacrifices that income that she might have received at work. Now, I'm not saying that these are symptoms of a capitalist doctrine, because they aren't. They are symptoms, however, of a culture that has fully bought into this belief that material prosperity is our highest aim, and as a result has completely abandoned and neglected its responsibility to address the other aspects of what contribute to true and meaningful happiness, which is a fundamentally moral question. Capitalism isn't just a political policy, it's a social doctrine, and any social doctrine that neglects morality, culture, and religion is incomplete at best. For true human flourishing and happiness, which should be our highest aim, we need to comprehensively respond to those other challenges. So what is the right answer? Well, I would say that I don't have it, but whatever it is, it needs to show some appreciation for metaphysical concepts like truth, goodness, and beauty, instead of leaving that to the marketplace to then figure out and sell back to us with our sneakers. It needs to admit that human beings are fundamentally religious creatures, and as much as we hate talking about religion, our refusal to include that within our political discourse is probably a lot worse than any official doctrine might be. This means that agnosticism becomes the official doctrine, which treats something that is fundamental to our humanity as an afterthought or something that is not worth considering or addressing. Avoiding the question is actually an answer to the question, and in so doing, we just become idolaters of products, celebrities, and materialism. And I'm going to paraphrase him, but as my friend Dr. Ryan Topping, he said something like, if you take away a people's religion, they will dig in the dirt for idols. Thank you so much for watching that. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you got something out of it. And if you did, and you want to consume more content like this, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Or if you saw this on Facebook, then like my page and follow along. If you're on YouTube, it's not enough anymore to subscribe because YouTube wants to think that it can tell you what you should watch instead of what you actually want to watch. So in this case, you actually have to hit that little bell to be notified as to whether or not I've uploaded something more recently. So please subscribe and hit the bell at the same time. That really helps me out a lot. And if you could consider sharing this among your social network, that helps me a lot too. And if you want to support the making of these videos, please consider supporting my business, which is a communications and strategic marketing company who specializes especially in branding and web design. And this is especially catered towards ministries and apostolates and parishes. We have a parish web design system that we've built specifically for parishes and churches that is affordable, but also beautifully packaged and easy to use. So if you're interested in that, check out my business, which is holdsworthdesign.com, and hit the contact button in the navigation and get in touch, and we can figure out if there's a good fit for you there.